Here with us now is National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. Michael, of course, thank you so much for being on with us today. We've been talking with you about this trial on a few days before today, and I have to tell you that I think the prosecution is doing a really great job. Here's where she really sold me on the prosecution's theory of the case. He was on the phone until he got to the body parts, but then he just didn't know the car was still connected to the cell tower, that he had 2 hours with a power saw. That's that time that you had pointed out was an issue in your mind. No one else had access to the wife. He said she was at the hospital and she had defensive wounds. That's common sense. That's all I had to hear to say, bang, that's exactly what I think is happening.
Yeah, her operative line was, I know you didn't check your common sense at the door. I agree with her. I have an analogy for every case. Sometimes the battering ram analogy, sometimes the shock and awe. For this case, I use the boa constrictor. The boa constrictor is exactly the analogy I look at this case. It tightened and tightened, tightened, and right now the neck just snapped off right now with that closing argument. It's not done yet, but to me, case is done. It's been proven. I think he's cooked.
I do too.
And basically, she mentioned this felony murder thing, which I thought was great as well. It really is sort of that ace in the hole, that insurance, just in case. And I don't think that's the case here, but just in case someone on that jury thinks there's not enough evidence that he had motive, means, and opportunity to kill her. We certainly have evidence of these wounds on her head. I think there were 9 wounds on her head. She had these stab wounds, one of them in the stomach as well, these cut wounds. She said that's aggravated assault. And that, combined with the other things that went on in this case, gives us felony murder. And I think that they've really covered their bases.
They hate this guy thoroughly. He made him go on a wild goose chase, so they want to make sure he gets convicted. I like the way you said it, insurance. This is exactly kind of like how it will act for them as insurance. He's going to get convicted. I rarely see attorneys get acquitted when they're at trial. I always tell people, if I'm ever indicted for stealing a rock from the moon, I'll take a plea. I would have no shot in front of a jury. Juries hate attorneys, but this guy really, really made them hate him. I think he's cooked.
But you know, I have to say this about this particular attorney on trial. Something doesn't make sense to me. Body parts are found pretty quickly in 3 different counties, but yet the instruments used to kill her, to cut her up, are not found. The blood, the murder location. So could he have been so, if he's convicted and he did this, could he have been so smart to have gotten rid of all those things, yet left a body where all the parts were found?
Yeah, I mean, he laid a trail for himself. He put the body in different places, which to me, if you're trying to cover yourself up, you've increased the likelihood that one body part is going to be found. But to your point, he clearly, if he did this, he covered up the murder weapons and he hid them. That's easier to cover up because you can just wash them. I know he bought tubs. You can wash them. You could discard them. You could put them back somewhere. Body parts are a lot more difficult to hide. He had some knowledge as a former prosecutor, but I think he had a mental breakdown, so I think he ended up laying a trail that he got caught on.
Fair enough. All right, we have to step aside here, Mike. Let's bring back in our guest still with us, National Trial Attorney Michael Jaafar. And Michael, he took the stand today in his own defense. The way the defense attorney began his closing argument, it seemed to me he didn't want the jury to focus at all on any of that, this existence of Jim McIntyre. He wanted them to focus on the evidence. So my sense was he probably didn't want him to testify. But I want to get your thoughts, because I feel like he had to testify. And the reason he had to testify is because they had the tape of him telling his stories there, right? So he had to explain those stories, so he pretty much had to take the stand.
He had no choice but to testify. This case has a lot of the Alex Murdaugh type overtures on it, right? You have an attorney, he killed his wife. In that case, killed his wife and son. He basically was caught lying and being shifty and had very, very, very shifty moves before the murder, after the murder. And so at this point, I think the attorneys made the decision in pushing their client to testify because of all the inaccuracies, inconsistencies, and lies. He had no choice but to testify. He did the right thing in doing that.
Well, what's interesting to me is we had talked about, I think this might be the kind of client the attorney said, no, we don't want you to testify. You've told your story twice. You can't make it any better. But even if that was or wasn't the advice, this was the kind of client that was going to testify. He was going to tell his story, and tell his story he did. I sure did like how the prosecution disposed of Jim McIntyre. I would submit, she said that a lot, can't find a person that doesn't exist. And that kind of took care of that issue, because you wonder, did they investigate? Did they look for Jim McIntyre? They didn't didn't testify to that. Should they have? Should they have presented some kind of testimony that they attempted to find Jim McIntyre during the investigation and they didn't, Michael?
It bothered me that they didn't do that. I'm glad you brought that up, because here's the thing. The jury they're gonna look back and say, look, you expect me to believe that there was this Jim McIntyre guy, made you evasive, made you act the way you acted, and that was the explanation. But there was not even an attempt to find this Jim McIntyre. I think every single jury member will look at that as a linchpin as to why they're going to convict this defendant, because it's way too shifty, it's way too evasive. You have a family member who's missing. You lied to her family about the fact that she had a stroke, she had sepsis. So I do think that their failure to do that, I feel like there were so many clumsy mistakes in the theory of the case. I think it could have been tighter. I'm not saying he'd be acquitted if they did that, but that what usually brought up is one of the many points that bothered me about the theory of the defense.
You know, I want to go back to your point earlier about that juries don't like lawyers. I want to dig into that a little bit. Now, you know, we've seen many lawyers go on trial. You mentioned one, Murdoch, when he went on trial. But, you know, again, he was involved in so many different things. But just want to dig a little bit more into that theory. What do you think that's about, if, in fact, you think that's true?
I'm glad you asked that question. It's deeply ingrained in the American psyche to not trust lawyers and politicians. People just don't trust us. They don't like us. It's just that. If you're ever announced at a table of friends and you're one of like 8 or 9 people, hey, there's Jim over here, he's a doctor. There's Timothy over here, he's a teacher. There's Michael Jaafar over there, he's a lawyer. People cringe. People don't like lawyers. People fear lawyers. They just don't. It's heavily ingrained. Now, in my life, in my 19 years, I've only seen one lawyer get acquitted of a crime. Now, I'm not saying that's the only lawyer who's been acquitted, but that's just, people just don't like lawyers.
I would agree that it is true when you go to a dinner party and you say you're a lawyer, everyone's like, oh.
No, you're guaranteed to be the butt of a joke.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you haven't heard them all already. Thank you, Michael Jaafar, for joining us tonight.